Welcome to another episode of Black Belts and Boardrooms, where our guests, who are experts and craftspeople in their own right, show up and teach us about leadership, or at least teach us about how to show up as the best version of yourself. And today, I'm excited for our guest, Renard, because we get to learn something from an educator, or at least somebody who can be that educator, right? I don't know how you feel about that, Renard, but that's how I feel.
Hey, I'm excited about who we have. Amir, who do we have?
We have today Dr. Keith Dorsey. Keith, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Amir and Renard. Looking forward to it.
So, Keith, we like to have at least a little bit of fun. So, the first one is going to be a softball. Do you play any sports?
Yes, I grew up in the martial arts. I started the martial arts when I was 6. I started competing as a young teen and throughout my military career. And I, in high school, was football, basketball, track, but martial arts competitions were year round. And as an adult, I started running. And I was like Forrest Gump. I would go out and come back with a beer. and I start running marathons, half marathons, 10Ks, and so on and so forth. So most of the things I do right now are outdoor related, not so much sports. A tiny bit of pickleball, but that's showing my age. So I just go more with hiking, biking, and running at this particular point. And I still stay in shape from a martial arts standpoint.
Well, so help me out. What martial art is your go to?
Well, my focus has been around Korean, and so 3 different types of Taekwondo, and then Tang Sudo as well. And then for a period there, I was in a Japanese style Shotokan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You're a man after my heart. I will tell you this because Renard knows this. I am not a grappler. I am not a guy who wants sweaty people on top of me at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm right there with you. In fact, I told you in high school was football, basketball, and track, but in middle school it was football and or really wrestling. And then it got to a point where I didn't enjoy all the grappling. So I figured with the Korean art, you could dance, you could do flying kicks until you're blue in the face. And the problem is what happens once they get you down on the ground. And I thought about a little Hapkido at that particular point. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, I totally understand. So as a taekwondo practitioner myself, which is the longest time I've spent in an art, I 100% understand, and I tell Renard, and jokingly, of course, that if I ever got on the ground, Renard's gonna have a field day with me, and I'm not gonna have any chance.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just gonna ask for forgiveness, Let's
Yeah,
say
exactly.
two more, and then we'll end it.
Yeah. That's amazing. So, Keith, I'm hearing a theme here. You've not just started in a martial art, then you go into running and then biking, etc. And I'm hearing the theme of chapters. It seems like you come and go in seasons. And I know that from your professional background, military, corporate, and then now you do a lot of work with boards, and that's kind of part of your portfolio. Is that a good framing for me to say that you think in terms of chapters?
I think that was a happy accident, Amir,
Mm,
quite honestly. Initially, I knew at the age of 9 I was going in the military. I I
mm,
I just I would beg my mom when I was little. I said, back then Kung Fu was out, the show. And I said, I either want to be sent to go live with the monks, to train full time every day, all day, every day, or I want to go to a military school. And my mom started crying, single mom at the time, and she started crying. She said, you don't like me or love me?" I said, "I do." And I want to go train 24/7. That's just who I was. And unfortunately none of those happened, but I did, train in martial arts my whole childhood. And I immediately at the age of 17 enlisted in the Air Force the summer between my junior and senior year of high school. I knew I wanted to go in the military and I wanted to go in the army with all my buddies who just graduated and they were going in the army. And I was about to start my senior year of high school. And my mom said, Keith, I'm not going to sign and you're not 18. The only way I'm going to give you authorization to enlist before you're 18 is if you go in what she thought was the most difficult one to get in, and that's the Air Force. And I was so serious about the military, I said, you know what? Air Force, here I come. And so before I started my first day of my senior year of high school, I knew which day I was leaving for basic training when I graduated. So for me, that was the beginning. And my intention, Amir, was intention was to make a 20, 30-year career out of it. Go to college while I was in, hopefully a ROTC or a academy while I was in, and then, go up the ladder until I was a general. And and while I was in, I got promoted below the zone. My career was going like crazy. I became a non-commissioned officer really fast, and I said, if I can do this in this huge corporation called the U.S. Air Force, imagine what I can do in corporate America. And so Reagan came out with this early out program, and I got out just around the 5-year mark and started chapter 2, which was corporate America. And I took a lot of the leadership, a lot of the drive that came from the martial arts, that came from the military, and those transferable skills I rolled into my corporate career that started out in commission sales. and and people said, why would you go in commission sales? You mean they're not paying you anything? No, not unless I sold something. I left the UK where I was last stationed, moved back home to the Washington, D.C. area. Most of my family members worked for the federal government. And when my wife and I had a kid, my family member said, Keith, you got to get a real job. And let me get you some interviews with the federal government. And I said, you know what? Oh, I believe in what I can do. I was already going to college while I was in the Air Force and when I got out, and I was taking business classes and most of my business classes were around sales. And I knew I had a passion for sales. And there was this big conference that came through, and there were probably like 20 different speakers. And I paid money we didn't have to go hear these 20 different speakers speak. And what's in it for them? They get to sell all their cassette tape series and on how to do this and how to do that. I came home cheesing. I had a stack of of many different type of sales workshop cassette series. And I walked in with this $500 worth of this stuff. And my wife looked at me and said, we got this little infant. You're in commission only sales and you just spent $500 on cassettes. And at that time, I immediately took a position. I think the base was $20,000 plus commission, selling to payroll clients, selling insurance to them. And I went through this whole program. I listened to every single one of those cassette series, and I learned so much from it. That first year that this Fortune 1000 started a brand new sales division of 50 salespeople, I was one of those 50 salespeople. And I was the only one in this brand new inaugural year of this sales team to hit quota that year. And they flew me up to Rochester, New York, and they asked me, they said there was a whole bunch of people sitting around the conference table, a whole bunch of executives. And they said, we clearly got the quota wrong because you're the only one to hit quota in the first year. But what did you do that others weren't doing? And I said, well, I went through your training program, but then I took what you taught me and I took the things that I learned from many other areas and I incorporated it. And I was able to do this, this, and this. They grilled me for over 6 hours, asking me question after question. And they said, you didn't only hit quota, you smashed your quota. And we love what you just taught us. You're immediately promoted to a field sales manager. You're going to have DC, Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and Philadelphia. And we want you to teach others what you did. And that was the beginning of that second chapter. And from a leadership standpoint, and I just became a turnaround specialist at this Fortune 1000, flying, moving my family from one location to another, taking over teams, teaching them how to do what those programs taught me, coupled with what the the company taught. And that started my 30-year career in corporate America, really becoming a student of my profession, transferring the things I learned from the martial arts and the military, that persistence, that, indomitable spirit, doing the things you need to do to get things done, and reverse engineering to actually get there and not letting anything stand in your way. Figure out a way to go over it, under it, around it, through it. So much so it became a problem because there are certain things that I overcame. And I'm sure God had no intentions on me doing that. And he wanted me to go this way, back up and go that way. But I found a way through it and was in a heap of trouble. But nevertheless, um, that's, how I serendipitously ended up with a career as a growth strategist and a career salesperson and turnaround specialist. And so I did that for almost 29 years. And then in January of 2019, I entered my third chapter that I call my portfolio career of doing a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And that's executive advisory work, serving on boards. I went back to school, got my doctorate in organizational change and leadership with a focus around governance, corporate board refreshment, corporate board diversity. And and then everything I'm doing right now, none of it was on my bucket list. Not one thing. I kind of let go and let God and transfer not only martial arts, not only the military, but now 30 years of just understanding business and understanding walking a mile in the executive shoes and different things like that. And it turned into something that really, from a human capital standpoint, rounds things up nicely for me to help other executives do the things they need to do to actually get on corporate boards. I attack this from a different angle. I am what they call a unicorn. I was an executive. I was a academic that researched and studied what people needed to do to get here. I was tapped on the shoulder by a global executive search firm to be a managing partner and a practice leader of their CEO and board services. I walked them out from a professional search perspective. I walked them out as an executive. I walked them out as a board member, and I walked them out as a academic studying these things. I honestly don't know someone that's done it and looked at this from four different angles. And I'm bilingual. I speak academia and I speak business because sometimes business people, especially CEOs, say, I bring in this consultant that has all these letters behind their name and I don't understand a word they're saying to me, but I'm able to speak their language and break it down in simple terms as to the business imperative behind the things that we're talking about, not just the theory behind it. So that was a long-winded answer to let you know that this has been a serendipitous, let go, let God sort of journey, but it's beautiful.
It certainly is. Keith, you never stopped investing in yourself. And I think that is a very important skill. If anything, I took away from what you just described, starting from when you didn't have money, but you took the time to go to a conference, buy all of these resources to help bring you the knowledge you needed in that moment, and then you put that to work, and then you went back to school, and then again investing in yourself to get a new perspective on what you're doing, and then so on and so forth. So I just want to put a finer point on that, is invest in yourself as a key skill. But you said also something about boards and executives, and I'll drop this question because I know this is something that I would love to hear Renard's perspective on as well, and maybe you could help both of us in that case. A lot of folks that, or at least I'll say in my circle, we aspire to be the best leaders. We aspire to be the best executive when we are in that capacity and given that privilege. If there was maybe one or two pieces of advice that we should all take home with us, who are aspiring to be those best leaders and executives, what would be those one or two things that you would leave us with?
I'd say the first point that I would make is I heard this many, many years ago. I wish I can state where I heard it, but I can't. So my apologies to the original, the person that came up with this. Is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Mm,
And the bottom line there is oftentimes the company has a remit. The company says they want you to do X, and they tell their leaders, make certain your team does X. And most leaders say, okay, we got to charge that hill. We got to do this. We got to do that. Well, the bottom line here is you got to slow down and get to know your people. And I believe in getting to know their personal motivations as well as their professional motivations. And so if we start with people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, I would have one-on-ones with my direct reports, every week to bi-weekly, depending upon where we are at that particular point. And the first 15 minutes of my one-on-ones is just a check-in. We are not even going to think about talking business. And occasionally they will immediately say, oh, I'm so glad we're connecting. Let me tell you. No, slow down. Last week, you were talking about your kids' bar mitzvah. How did it go? I want to hear more about it. Or you had to go pick up your fourth grader because they were having problems with arithmetic. Tell me, how did that conversation go? And, and having that check in lets them know how much you care about them. And we would naturally, 7 to 15 minutes later, start to roll into our agenda. But time out. We're human beings. Let's break a little bread. Let's talk. And that was key. So I truly believe in slowing the process down to get better results, and then to find out their personal motivations as well as their professional motivations. When you find out why people are going to work and why they chose to work where they're working and what they're trying to accomplish, whether that's buying their first home, their next home, putting their kids through school, whatever, or working to get a different job,
mm,
to be able to have that trust and to have those conversations, I can then tie the company's objectives into their objectives. And my goal and my secret, I think, to success was if I focus on helping them accomplish their personal goals and their professional goals, the byproduct of that is my success and the company's success. And so those would be the two things, Amir, that I would share with you.
Man,
sage advice.
yeah. I like he sounds like a mirror of me. That's the same thing I tell my teams in my department. I want to get to know you, because if I get to go know you, then I'm gonna be able to bring the best out of you. If I, like you say, if you know their motivations, sometimes someone's having a terrible week outside of work. I always say you don't know what people are going through outside of work in order to be able to smile for 8 to 10 hours and don't know what they got going on outside of that. So it's really getting to know them, like you say, know what their aspirations are, what's inspiring them in order for them to be great. So I agree with that. And also I want to go back. since you were in the Air Force, first of all, thank you for your service. I really mean that. I come from a military family, so when I say it, I do mean that. And I almost went into the Air Force. I did 4 years of ROTC in high school, but didn't make the Air Force. But still, a lot of the stuff that I learned in ROTC, I still do to this day.
I believe that.
When we talk about gig line, I'm still checking the gig line every single time. So it's just certain things that I learned from that. Same thing with martial arts that I take with me every day. But I want to go a little bit back. You had such a esteemed career for 30 plus years, and then you got to pivot, like you say, into your chapter three, and that's boards. What made you make the decision that you wanted to start looking into and being on boards? What inspired you in that lane?
Once again, a bit of luck. And that's why I wrote the book, because too much of this can be luck. And if you really want to help others do the things they need to do to get different results to get on boards, we got to move away from that luck. But my very first board, I went back to school in my mid 40s to get my MBA. And I went through a program at Pepperdine University called the President and Key Executive MBA. You hear so much about MBAs, and then you also hear about executive MBAs. Well, this is an executive MBA on steroids. The average age of the 14 people in my cohort was 45 or 48 at the time. And the prerequisite was you had to be a president or a key executive either in your own company or at a corporation. And so that was the prerequisite, but it was an MBA program. So instead of going through all the typical case studies, whether that's Sloan or Harvard or whatever, we're actually looking at our own companies as executives. And we would meet every 3 weeks for from Thursday evening to Sunday afternoon, Saturday afternoon. We would meet every 3 weeks for a 15-month period of time, and and that's when I decided to go back to school and to get into that sort of program. And so I went through this program and we learned so much, and I was so just enthralled with it. When I graduated, uh, the Grazia Dio Business School at Pepperdine put two things in front of me. One, they said, Keith, we want you to come back and be faculty for us. And I became adjunct professor and a class advisor. And so I was the only professor that was a part of the entire 15-month program. Otherwise, most professors, there were five, would do their 2 to 3 month curriculum and then move on. I was the one that kept that line there. So they offered me that, and I became adjunct faculty as a class advisor. And then they said, we would like you to serve on our board, our business school board. And I said, well, tell me more about this board. What do you and that was my first one. Someone tapped me on my shoulders. Couple About a year after that, I'm an executive at a Fortune 500, and a recruiter reached out to me and said, there's a firm that would like to bring you on and interview you and possibly bring you on to serve on their large private company board. And and at the time, I started the process and realized there was a conflict of interest and I had to pull out. But then I said, this is all interesting right here. I first Pepperdine introduced me to it. Now a recruiter reached out to me, and that board was very interested in me, but it was a conflict. And that's when I got that itch right there and said, this board thing could be interesting. And it took off from there. And it wasn't until I went into semi-retirement. I'm not allowed to say that anymore, but because I'm working more now than I ever did. But when I crossed that line in January of 2019 to that third chapter, that's when I said, I'm going to make this a full-time thing. And my goal would be to serve on 3 to 4 boards as part of my portfolio career.
That's great. I feel like you said, these chapters happen. Someone tap you on the shoulder. You got to other people saw you as a great person on board and wanted to bring you in, but there was a conflict. So for you as a person who is on boards now, have been on previous boards, what could you tell our audience or our listeners to why they should think about the next part of their chapter, not just getting to the C-suite, but also saying, "Hey, I'm gonna take the things I know and help other companies by being on their boards." What would you tell our listeners about that?
I researched a lot about that and I write a lot about that. And unfortunately, Renard, when I think about my career and many others' careers, we get tapped on our shoulders a lot, especially if you spend double digit years with an organization. You get tapped on your shoulders to take the next position. You sometimes, in my career, I interviewed twice. I worked for 2 large companies, a Fortune 1000 for almost 17 years and a Fortune 500 for almost 12 years. So I interviewed twice, once in 1990 and once in 2007. But I had at least 20 roles because they just kept tapping me on my shoulder and saying, Keith, we can use your help here. Well, let me understand you correctly. You want to promote me? You want to pay me more money? Yes. And so that's how I took on roles. Fortunately enough, in an accidental sort of way, the human capital I developed over that 29-year period is attractive to boards. But that was luck. I'm challenging young people today to be more intentional. And what I write about is if you understand what boards are, you can pick in your 20s, 30s, 40s, and even 50s that I ultimately want to be on a private or public large, board. And then reverse engineer the things you need to do from a human capital and social capital standpoint with your career and your network. And if you do that, then instead of just accepting a position because someone tapped you on the shoulder and they want to pay you more and it feels nice to be wanted, and instead of accepting a role that way, really thinking about what type of experience and expertise will boards ultimately want and begin to intentionally orchestrate your career to accept roles or to go after roles to fit there, but you're reverse engineering it and then executing your plan, surrounding yourself with the right mentors, sponsors, allies, and various people to help you actually do the things you need to do to get the ultimate results you actually like to get. And then when you talk about board diversity and different things like that, you are actually doing the things to make certain that you are tap worthy down the road and that you executed a perfect plan socially and from a social capital standpoint and a human capital standpoint. So I would tell people to be more intentional, but it starts by knowing. I joke and tell people I couldn't even spell the word board in my 30s, but it worked out. But if we really want to help people be more intentional, then let's teach them what they need to do along the way and not just accept a position because someone is interested and they want to pay you more. And in my book, I created 4 protagonists that I use to take the lessons from out of every single chapter and apply it in a case study format to 2 to 4 of those protagonists at the end of every chapter. And they are a 25-year-old brand new manager in a corporation, a 40-year-old senior manager in a corporation, a 55-year-old executive who's going to retire in the next 3 to 5 years, and a 62-year-old CEO of a second generation family business who's been the CEO for the past 12 years, but is about to turn the business over to her much younger brother. And all four of these women, 25, 40, 55, and 62, said, I want to, at some point, serve on a private or a public corporate board. Well, what should they be doing in their careers at 25, 40, 55, and 62? That 62-year-old that's been the chair of her own board for 12 years has never served as an independent director on someone else's board. There are things she's going to have to unlearn and relearn in order to make that transition. That 25-year-old who is a brand new entry level sales manager in a company, what does she need to do at 32 to get the human capital experience that boards will find attractive? What type of nonprofits should that 40-year-old join? So this is intentional, um, task and plan in order to accomplish a goal. And that's what's often missing, is that intentionality that I'm really trying to solve for, and getting rid of that just horrible myth that we would have more women serve on corporate boards if more were qualified. They're qualified like crazy. You just got to fish where the fish are. And then to get the next generation qualified, we just got to be more intentional about the little tweaks and the little things that they can do throughout their boardroom journey, career called career, in order to be ready. And not only ready, not only seen, but known when the time comes. So that's what I would say, Bernard. How does that resonate?
No, that resonates a lot. I'll give you a message. Someone that's been on multiple boards told me, because I never thought about it at first, but he said, think about the influence you can make for someone who needs better health care. He said, "Think about that," and I never thought about it, and once I started thinking about that, of what you can do and be on the board, how you can make change for someone who might need better healthcare, etcetera, a better wage, etcetera, I was like, "Oh, okay." I really, it made me wanna be on boards because I never thought about it like that till someone who's sitting on boards told me. But going to the book, of course, The Boardroom Journey, you focus on women. What made you focus on women? Because you could have focused and said, "This is for everybody." You could have
Absolutely.
done that, but you
Keep the
decided
market
to,
wide open,
yeah,
but yeah.
keep it
Well,
open.
several things. I was for 30 years in corporate America. I was a turnaround specialist. And as a turnaround specialist, my job was to lift the hood and then figure out whether they were having a people, product, or process issue, or a combination of the three, and then begin to make the necessary tweaks to turn things around. And when I was going for my doctorate, I happened to notice that this wicked problem around parity existed on boards. The lack of gender and ethnic diversity on corporate boards was ridiculous. And I don't think it, after research, I don't think it was that way due to malice. It was that way due to the prerequisites that were required in order to become a board member. If most boards wanted you to be a former or active CEO or a former or active CFO, the bulk of the people in those roles happen to be, in this example, white men. Were they keeping other people out of it? Not necessarily. Good people do bad things, but for the most part, it was because of the prerequisites. And once we opened up the door and started opening up the prerequisites, more and more qualified people from many walks of life were ready for or able to serve on corporate boards. And so my research and for my doctorate was focused around the lack of gender and ethnic diversity on corporate boards. And it was my dissertation chair that said, Keith, we got to narrow that down for your dissertation. I said, but there's not enough research out there. This is a wicked problem that I know we can solve. I'm transferring my 30 years of corporate turner as a turnaround specialist experience to this, and said, "There's ways we could solve for this." And she said, "Keith, I am so excited about your passion, but the only way you're going to walk across the stage at the University of Southern California with your doctorate is when I approve your dissertation. And I am not going to approve a dissertation that's that wide. You're going to have to narrow this down." I said, "Okay, let's just make it all about women." She said, "You're going to have to narrow this down." And I said, "Really?" I said, "What do I do with all my research?" She said, "Write a book after this. You'll be a doctor. You'll have the credibility. You'll have the research. Write a book. But right now, you need to narrow this down." So my dissertation is called Corporate Board Diversity, a Path to Board Service from the Wisdom of Black Women Directors. And so, and I narrowed and I pulled out the research that was associated with the barriers and enablers Black women had, and I started to see the themes that came from their journey were transferable to all women, and then the themes that came from all women were transferable to anyone who was seeking their first or next corporate board seat. And postdoctorate, I just kept my research going to the point where I interviewed hundreds of women directors who who shared their story about how they got there. And I also interviewed many exceptional women executives that have been trying to get on corporate boards for at least 5 years to no avail. And I found themes with both. And using my transferable skills of really seeing, do we have a people, product, or a process issue? I transferred that and those themes and the learnings from those themes I wrote about in the book.
That's amazing. You know, that title, I'm impressed that you memorize it and can repeat it back. That's a very long title.
It is when you have to narrow things down.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But
Well,
it ended up working out nicely, and I ended up writing a Harvard Business Review um, article that was based off of that dissertation.
I love reading, research papers, so your dissertation is gonna be on my next reading for sure.
No one ever.
Well, you
No.
need to get to know me, Keith. You'll find out that I have,
Uh,
some
I'm
really
like you,
peculiar.
Amir. I enjoy it as well.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, I wanna pick a little bit more on the theme that you've been writing about for quite some time, and that's diversity. Do you find that outside of, your research, that there is sufficient diversity across corporate America? And is there anything more to the story than just the prerequisites being the problem? Because I feel like if it's a prerequisite issue, somebody would have been, consulting that out of corporate America because that's what consultancies do.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it sounds to me like that's not really a true statement, and maybe there's a nuance there that I'm not picking up on that you can share with us.
You know, diversity is important. And unfortunately, as a society, we try to simplify things, and simplification, sometimes we can oversimplify it, and things can get lost in translation. And so we're in an anti DEI environment at this particular point. And if you turn on certain media outlets, they'll tell you how much they hate DEI. We have executive orders that talk about DEI is wrong and is dead, and you can't have meritocracy and diversity. They cannot coexist. And there's a bit of gaslighting that's going on out there. And when people tell me how much they loathe the DEI, I'll ask them, I believe in just by asking the question, change ensues. And so I will ask them, well, tell me what you dislike about DEI. And oftentimes they can give me the sound bites from their favorite media show, But then I like to ask second, third, and fourth level questions so that we can get to the crux of things. Let's peel the onion back and figure out what's really going on. Back to that, people, product, or process, and turning things around, fixing something. And let's get to the core of it. And so I challenge people to get rid of the acronym, because the acronym became this three-letter word that is defined by whatever gaslighting is going on in society. But then the way that you get rid of the acronym and say, well, the D is for diversity. What do you dislike about diversity? The
Mm.
E is for equity. What are the things about equity that you truly dislike? And the I is for inclusion. What about inclusion gives you pause? And so the myth of diversity and meritocracy can't coexist is nonsense. The backbone of diversity is meritocracy. And so I was speaking at the Vatican a couple years ago in the World Changer Conference, and cardinals were there and others. And uh, I was asked the question, very similar question that you just asked me. And so I told the whole room, and people have their headphones in, having my speech translated into their language. And I asked them to close their eyes. And I want you to think about something. And so you got a whole room, some people not allowed to be married, some people, and so I wanted to pick something everyone can identify with, everyone in the room. I said, close your eyes and think about a woman in your life or women in your life that are exceptional, whether that's your daughter, your mother, your aunt, your cousin, your friend, your sister. Everyone has that woman they could picture if their eyes are closed. And I said, now let's think about that woman and the things that woman that makes that person exceptional, and picture them doing what they do for a life, for their career, whether that's be a stay-at-home mom or work at a company or whatever the case may be. What Think about that person, and now think about, are they, if that person's company cared about the acronym DEI or diversity, equity, and inclusion, is the only reason why that loved one you're thinking about right now, is the only reason that person there is the company's position around diversity? Or is that person really all that in a bag of chips? and and they just started to smile. I said, open your eyes, look around the room. I said, diversity and meritocracy can coexist. But if I'm telling you to think about, if you're not African American and to think about an African American, or you're not Hispanic and to think about Hispanic, or you're not in fill in the blanks, that's hard to relate. But we all have exceptional women in our lives that earn where they are. So the fact that you're saying we can't have meritocracy and diversity is nonsense. And they said, you're 100% correct. So some of it is about slowing it down. And if we got to get rid of the words that make people tune out, fine. Just continue to do what you know works. Because having the root of diversity isn't just the moral imperative that it's right. It's about bringing differing perspectives in the room to mitigate risk, to better disrupt, to seek blue oceans. And that's the beauty of having differing perspectives. And so when I go back to, what about diversity you don't like? What is it about equity you don't like? What is it about um, uh, inclusion you don't like? Let's even get rid of those words if you like. What is it about differing perspectives, having differing perspectives in the room that you don't like? Because you know what I like about differing perspectives? I don't care what you are. I don't care where you were raised or where you came from, what color you are, your gender. Taking the time to reflect to understand the differing perspectives you bring to the table is the beauty of diversity. No one is being discriminated against when you're talking about taking your observable diversity coupled with your cognitive diversity, which I call optimal diversity, which is the root of differing perspectives. I will find it hard for someone to tell me, that's bollocks, Keith. That's not right. What do you think about that, Amir?
You know, I'm trying to soak in everything you've said there, but there's a few points that come to mind, and I love your perspective, by the way. I wanna make one comment, then I'll answer your question, and the comment I wanna make is that what you've just now talked about, you've actually given us an example of what it means to meet people where they are
Yes.
and not meet people where you are, and I think that's a big difference in this day and age. We like to think
Prove
where
our
we are.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You know, we have such a nihilistic mindset these days. In fact, more than I think we should. You know, it's not healthy anymore in my mind. But to come back to your question, your to me is, you know, I'm actually thinking about flags. You know, because you say DEI and pick any number of these acronyms. I think people like to galvanize around flags, whether it's an acronym or a flag with colors and symbols on it. And to your point, what I'm thinking about is how many boards out there are truly rallying around their flag versus trying to incorporate the meanings and symbols of other flags and spending a day and walking a mile in the shoes of those symbols. Because ultimately, we only benefit when we work together as a community. And diversity is actually talking about community, but
Absolutely.
it's hard as an individual to walk in somebody else's shoes. And in fact, I wanna pick on something you write about and say, which is who knows you,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So if I can throw that question back at you, but just with a different twist to it, if I am, and I'm just trying to be empathetic to people who may not necessarily do it as easily as you. How do I, if I want to be a board member, for example, or an executive, how do I uh, learn the skill of who knows you for myself, right? How would you make that actionable?
That came from out of my research. And it was one of those drop the mic moments that I wish I would have known years ago because it just seems so basic. But we grew up learning it's not what you know, it's who you know. And it works because as a young person, when we were looking for a job, we could submit an application or we can ask someone who we know works there, take our application to the hiring manager. So in that case, it's not what you know, it's who you know, because that person got your application in front of the person and vouched for you. So why challenge something that's real? It's not what you know, it's who you know. But my research showed when it came to boards, that was more, it was something else. It's not what you know, it's not who you know. There's this pre-vetting that goes on. So way before a search professional reaches out to a prospective board member about a role, or the nominations and governance committee reaches out to a board candidate, they are pre-vetted. And it's so easy to pre-vet now because of LinkedIn. If I if I heard about someone and I wanted to see if I wanted to take some of my precious time to interview that person, I will immediately Google them. I would go on LinkedIn and I would see who do I know that knows that person. Then I can place 3, 4, 5 different calls or send out emails and say, tell me about this person. And if everyone I reach out to has favorable things to say about you, that person, I will then reach out to that person. If they have unfavorable things to say about that person will never know that they were being considered, ever know that they were being considered for a board role. So I tell people that 60 to 70% of the board seats are filled by your network. The rest come from search, professionals and a combination. And and so when it comes to, it's not what you know, it's not who you know, it's actually who knows you. And here's the example I give, because they hear, well, 60 to 70% of the board seats are filled because of networks. I got to go around and go to as many events as I can, carry my business cards, squeeze palms, and kiss babies and hand out my business card. And because I got to let everyone, these people know that I'm interested in the board seat. And I give them this example instead. If you're serving on a panel, you're sitting on a stage, and you're one of five people on the stage on this panel, and you look at the audience, and there's 1,000 people in the audience, and you look and you scan the audience, you're like, I know about 30 people out there. If it's not what you know, it's who you know 30 people. But after the hour is over, there's now 970 more people heard the way you think, who liked the way you thought about things and presented and how articulate you were and different things like that. There are 970 more people who now know you, of which the majority of them you'll never get to know. You may go from 30 to 50 or 30 to 100, but even in that 30 to 100, you know, there's still a large percentage of people out there, 900 people that now know you. And when they are asked, if some of them are asked, who do you know? We're looking for our next board member. You know, 9 months ago, I heard Amir speak. He was serving on the panel. We were talking about this, and I just like the way he thinks. They give your name to a search professional at that particular point to vet you out. So now I say, it's not what you know. It's not who you know, because that's 30 people. It's who knows you. That's now 1,000 people. Just from that one event. Or you can squeeze palms, kiss babies, and hand out your business card. So I tell people, if you're horrible at small talk, don't do small talk. If you're great at writing, write blogs, write articles, have 10,000 people read your words and get to know you. If you're great at public speaking, do that. Do TED Talks, do panels, do fireside chats, and so on, because you don't have to know them. They just need to know you from a networking standpoint.
I think that is a much better framing than saying you have to brand yourself, you know?
What does that
Uh,
mean? Yeah.
exactly, exactly. Who knows you is so much better. And to the example you use, I feel like I'm just now an interactive member of a masterclass here, Keith, thanks to all the nuggets you're dropping here.
It seems so obvious. I never thought about it that way before.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I do love the framing much better. So, I appreciate you making it practical for us, Keith. I wanna ask one more quick question on that same point. So, what would you say to an executive who is not doing a good job with letting people know who they are? What are some of the quick ways they can go do it? I know you mentioned LinkedIn, and your book obviously is one way for them to go and learn more directly from you. What are some other tips you would give them very quickly?
Really quickly, I would say the biggest one, and the one that you can change immediately, is something really tweaking what we do in our society. You think about any dinner party or the person you're sitting next to on your next flight. What's the first question people ask you? What do you do?
Mm,
And we go on autopilot. And that autopilot statement is normally around 23 seconds and is very narrow mindedly focused around our vocation. And I challenge people to add 7 to 11 more seconds to their canned autopilot speech and say, and I serve on 2 nonprofit boards, and I'm in the process of looking for a private company board in this sector. And because what goes behind that is the other part. You tell anyone and everyone that you're interested in the board seat. And so why not just adapt what we unconsciously do in our society when we constantly ask people, what do you do? And I'm saying just tweak your autopilot speech a little bit more to incorporate all of you and not just your vocation. And that way you can begin to let many people know what is unfortunately for most executives, their best kept secret, that they would like to get on the board because they believe the only people they should tell that to are CEOs and other board members. But what my research showed, because of the networking, a bulk of those board positions were coming from bizarre places, whether that was your babysitter, your dog walker, because people know people. We have families, we have friends, and they come from all walks of life. Yes, you're a janitor, but your sister is a corporate executive. Your mom or your dad is this, and because you're a janitor, unfortunately, people think that you're invisible and you can hear so many different things that other people don't get to hear. I'm not judging anything. My point is love everybody, tell everybody, because you never know where it's coming from. And research has shown those examples are real.
Yeah, I gotta agree with that. You hit on a couple of points because I even say this: it's not who you know, it's who knows you, and that's why building all these relationships, etc., is so important. So, like you said, LinkedIn is a lot easier now. People go look and they go see who you have. So now you're about to get vetted by other people that know you. So you want to build this network, but I also love the other aspect that you were talking about, and it's really every to me, and this I've said this before, every conversation is an interview. So always be prepared. Like you said, it could be the custodial worker who overhears it. It could be X, Y, and Z. But every conversation is a potential interview for your next part of your journey. And if that's your board journey, that might be it as well. So always be prepared because you don't know who's listening. It could be somebody in the grocery store.
Yeah.
You having a conversation,
Yep.
they're like, "Oh, I talked to such and such." I
Yes.
think that'll be the right person. So I really, hinder on those 2 key points. The last thing I have to ask you for people who are already high level executives, and you talked a little bit about this earlier, but what are they missing to get on boards? They're already doing the great work, but it feels like they just can't get on the board. Is it a skills gap, etcetera? What's missing for them to get on boards?
Bernard, the two of you ask incredible questions, and thank you for that one. What I uncover what they're missing is most executives expect to tell you how great they are, and you connect the dots because they've been serving and they've been outstanding for the past 20 to 40 years. If I just tell you all the great things that I've done, and I've done it for in 5 different industries for 4 different, companies, and you will tell me how I would fit onto your board. And so I have people often say, "Keith, I would like to be on a private or a public corporate board." Well, tell me more. What type of board? Keith, I don't care as long as they're paying me, man. And so what are they doing wrong? They're keeping it way too broad. And there are two schools of thought. If you have this broad career that had you in many different functional expertises as well as your industries and chapters, you almost want to tell them everything. And that's like, as a receiver, that's drinking from a fire hose. And I honestly, when something comes up as a search professional, I don't know when to think about you. But that's one school of thought. Your career is so vast. I could do it. Just think about me every time. Well, I have 100 people reach out to me every week. You know how many of that is over a year, 52 weeks. How do I think about you every week? What's remarkable about you? And so I come from the school of thought, not throw it all up there and hope someone thinks about you. I want people to reflect, analyze them, figure out their own personal vision, mission, and values, figure out what brings them joy, figure out how their own value proposition as an individual, the stuff we've been trained to do as executives for our companies, just take a little bit of time and do it for yourself. When you could do that, then you can narrow focus. When you can narrow your focus, now I can think about you. Because when I get that weird request for a board member, I said, who was it? Who was it that said? And now I can hone in on them. And they connected the dots for me so that I know how to think about them. And people with the other school of thought said, but you narrowed your focus so much, you're missing all these board opportunities over here on the left and all these board opportunities over here on the right. And you're shooting yourself in the foot. No, actually, you're not being thought about. Your ego's way out of line. Because by the time we wrap up our 15-minute meet and greet, I'm going back to the fire station to put out the next fire. And I'm not thinking about you ever again.
Yeah.
Now, is that me being mean? No, you just didn't give me something to remember. Those who can know themselves and know what brings them joy and can articulate it succinctly by connecting the dots for the receiver, you could believe when I'm triggered, I want to think about it. That's the difference right there, Renard.
Hmm. That's perfect. Amir, what do you think?
Another nugget. I mean, that is so actionable. And Keith, this is one of the things we try and do on this podcast is we want everything that we do to be actionable, because at the end of the day, we feel that the leaders who spend their time with us are here giving service, and we want to make sure that we number one put a spotlight on the leader, and number two that the leader is helping us be of service by being of service themselves. And I think you've done a tremendous job here. So
Thank
I
you.
really am grateful for what you've just now said, because I think that's very actionable. Narrow it down, know yourself. And this is something Renard and I talk about offline, is that we have spent so much time in the same executive coaching program that the first thing we did was get to know yourself even more, you know?
Absolutely.
So,
How do I show up?
yeah,
How do I meet people where they are? How do I not use who I am and my mental models as a crutch? you know?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Keith, we're at the top of the hour, and I want to be respectful of your time. But before we end the show, we do this thing called the lightning round. And it's supposed to be quick. Don't put too much thought into it.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask my good friend and co-host Renard here to get us started.
Oh man. Okay. Let me think about it for a second. So, Keith, what is the best and worst board meeting you've ever been in?
Wow. The best is when we had an agenda and the right question was asked early on to realize we had a gap and we had something we really needed to solve for. And we scrapped the agenda and we focused on doing the right things. The worst board meeting that I've been on was when the management team put on a dog and pony show, and the entire board meeting, they presented to us. It was a beautiful history lesson. Then they gave us a update and a presentation on what they were going to do moving forward. And then we adjourned the board meeting. So we fly all the way there to get a history lesson and to hear the drink the Kool-Aid sort of rah, 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 what we're going to do next. And there was no compare and contrast quarter over quarter. And we all were supposed to say that was wonderful. That was the worst board meeting I've ever been to.
Well, people should hear that and know, don't do that in the next board meeting. All right. Well, I'm a book nerd. So aside from your book, The Boardroom Journey, what is another book that aspiring board leaders should read?
There are so many, and it really, I would say for me, it comes down to the components. I challenge people that reflect and analyze. I call it director capital. Reflect and analyze where they are today. Think about the boards that they would like to go to in the future. Look at the characteristics of the current board members at various different companies in the industries that you would like to serve on boards. See what they bring to the table that you have, and then uncover where you have gaps. So instead of reading just a basic board book, start to dive into fill your gaps from a director capital standpoint so that you can best show up and for the type of board that you would like. So instead of being generic here, Amir, in which you said you want actionable things, I think the actionable thing in this case is if one thing I notice is my executive presence isn't like those others, then your next board book should be about executive presence. And one thing I notice is I can go deep in cyber. I can go deep, in supply chain, but I cannot go deep from a profit and loss standpoint and financial acumen standpoint. My next book should be about that. My next course, whether it's a 3-month course or whatever, it should be about that. So instead of just trying to continue to be broad, let's be more, uh, I'm going to say, tactical about filling the gaps that our reflection uncovered.
Beautiful answer.
Yeah, that is beautiful. Okay. I got one for you. What is one question you ask every board candidate?
I kind of shared that one. Tell me what type of board you would like and why. Yeah. And and only 10% of the time they can truly answer that question. And that's foretelling. That speaks
Yeah.
volumes right there. And then I say, you're not ready. You're not, and let's figure that part out. Because many will say, "Well, no, 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 no. I want a public board." Well, why? And then they find that that was an ego base sort of one. Where can you add the most value and why? Well, I could do it all. Once again, even if you did get the interview, are you going to be selected with that answer? So just those are a couple quick ones right there.
All right, I'm gonna throw a controversial one your way.
Okay.
Board seat or C-suite? Which one's more influential?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Wow. Both, because they're two completely different roles. The C suite is about doing. The board, the saying that you often hear is noses in, fingers out, or heads in, hands out. C suite, you better have your noses, your fingers in and your hands in, because that's your baby. And great board members can ask thought provoking questions, not to say I got you, but to help you challenge your thought process, to help you think about what's around the corner, but not to do your job. Even if you walked a mile in their shoes, your job is not C suite. So they're both important. They're just two different jobs that you may have both at the same time for two different organizations, a board for one, C suite for the other. What do you think about that one, Amir?
No, I mean, I've always thought they're both important, but I haven't walked a mile like you have.
Yeah.
So, it's a better question for
Sure.
you than it is for me.
Oh, well, I appreciate that, and they are both very, very important, but they're really different roles.
Hmm. I have to say the same thing. You done walked way more miles than me as of yet, but definitely interested in that door of boards, etc. Like I currently do a nonprofit council with Make a Wish, so and a lot of people have told me that's where you start. That's
Yes.
where you should start
Yeah.
is nonprofit.
Largely because you get the experience that you need. You know, some people say the difference between a for profit and a nonprofit is the one word non. It that you know, when you're talking fiduciary boards on both sides, they're ran exactly the same. The transferable skills that you are able to bring to a for-profit board later are huge. But most importantly, the people sitting around that nonprofit board with you oftentimes are sitting on 2 to 3 private or public corporate boards as well. You think handing someone a board bio or resume is the way to get on a board? The best way to get on the board is to go through a 3 to 10 year interview by serving with them on a nonprofit board. They get to see you in action so that when they're sitting on their for profit, private, or public company board and they say, Mary's leaving, she's terming out. Who else do you know? Well, I know Renard. I've been on the board with Renard for 4.5 years, a nonprofit. Love his questions. I love the way he thinks. I think he can add value over here. They don't even need your bio at that point. You'll have one, but that person saw you in a 4.5 year interview. That's beautiful. I have people and I recommend joining a nonprofit board. They say, Keith, I don't have time. If you don't have time for a nonprofit board, then what makes you think you have time for the for profit board? If you've never served on a board before, but yes, I know you're a CEO of a company for the past 9 years, but you've never, or not a CEO has probably been on the board. Let's just say you're a VP of something for the past 9 years. You're a great executive that have transferable skills for a board, but you have no board experience. Go get some board experience. That's how you do it.
Mm. Okay, so I'm gonna ask you one more from my side. The boardroom journey in one sentence.
Boardroom Journey is a book that demystifies your path to the boardroom, no matter where you are in your
So that's a good
exec.
s that's a good sentence. That's a good sentence.
Yeah,
That's a good
because right now people think it's some good old boy club or just something that only a select few get or
Mhm.
afforded the opportunity. This is really dissecting it to in a reverse engineer sort of way to the steps. If you want it, the only reason you're not going to get it is because you're not willing to do the hard action steps and then execute. That's the key. You can learn about it, but then you got to execute. And it's all there. As long as you learn and execute, there is no reason why you wouldn't get on the board.
I'll add this one thing. I think, you also need curiosity about boards because I was someone taught and I got curious. I was like, "Oh," because I like for most of my career, I saw great people, so then all of a sudden I wanted to do what they were doing, and I saw someone on the board, I was like, "How do you even get on a board? How does that even work?" I was like, "I don't know how people get on boards," and I started talking to people, I was like, "I'm curious."
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
started asking questions, and that's how I started moving towards that direction myself, and I'll tell anybody, any for our listeners, start on a nonprofit, like, be of service.
Yeah.
Be of service. Trust me, you will be happy to be on a nonprofit and be able to make a true impact and impacting other people's lives. I'm grateful to be on a nonprofit and the work that we do, trust me, it'll just change the way you look at things. So I'll tell anybody on.
Well said. And you said it. You know, I said something earlier. Just by asking a question, change ensues. Your curiosity uh, created the opportunity where you're now seeking you have even more questions right now. And bottom line, you're going to make it happen.
I think that is a great way to end a great masterclass. Keith, this has been incredible. I mean, there have been so many nuggets, and I'm just reeling back all the different nuggets I've learned myself, and I'm sure the listeners will go back and find even more. But just to put a finer point to what you all are talking about, I'm reminded about a lesson that I was taught many, many years ago. Stop worrying about the title you have because title is given to you from somebody else. Think about the value that you're giving. And I think both of you have each given examples of how you can add value. Renard through curiosity and just wanting to learn more and then bringing that back. Keith, you through learning knowledge, investing in yourself, and then putting it to work because that's how you build the skill, not just through reading, but you have to do the work itself. And then that turns into wisdom and eventually value that other people can benefit from. So I can't thank both of you actually for such a delightful conversation. I actually had a lot of fun.
Oh, you're not alone. I'm over here sweating. You guys got me talking about what I'm passionate about and asking great questions. This was amazing. I truly appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
Keith, I appreciate the time you've given us today. So, just a reminder for our listeners, you have a great book out there, The Boardroom Journey, which I recommend everybody go read if you're aspiring to be a board member. What is the best way that our listeners could reach out to you? Maybe they can come up with some questions. How do they do that?
You can find me on LinkedIn under Dr. Keith D. Dorsey. You can also go to my website, Boardroom Journey. And within Boardroom Journey, you can actually link to buying the book on many different platforms. You can go to my one-on-one coaching section. You can go to my board consulting and advisory section. And you can also go to my speaking section right there under boardroomjourney.com.
Fantastic. Keith, once again, thank you very much for giving us your time. This has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. And to our listeners, I will say, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcast, Amazon, and other places where the show is available. Please give us your feedback. This is how we get better. And also, we want to make sure that other listeners benefit from the value we want to give back to our listeners as well as the communities we are a part of. Leaders like Keith today are the reason why we keep doing what we're doing. Renard, any last words?
And be curious, be intentional, even be strategic. That's the three things that I've taken away from here. Be intentional, even though sometimes things happen the way that someone taps you on the shoulder, but be curious, be intentional, and be strategic.
Fantastic. And with that, we'll see you on the next one.